We have a pretty big patch coming on November 27th to Fellowship that is going to address some future balance changes when the major content patch releases sometime in December. So let's just jump right into these patch notes and see what we got. So the first major change that we're going to be seeing, let me zoom in just slightly. This is going to be an update that's kind of geared towards the patch that's coming on December 11th, which again, it's been hinted that this is going to be like the first major patch of Fellowship's release. And in terms of the scaling and the progression changes here, you can just see that there's different categories on how enemies' health and damage is being nerfed or adjusted kind of ahead of this upcoming patch. Next up, we do get some hero adjustments, one of those being Alarian. Alarian had a massive update last week, and this is to kind of reel some of those changes back in. He was kind of propelled from probably the weakest DPS to being the top DPS, to the point where you would usually want to run 2 Alarians. So this is a change kind of aiming at reeling Alarian's power levels back in. This is going to be a nerf to his Heartseeker damage, or his Heartseeker barrage damage, and the talent that also scales with it, which is Impending Heartseeker. Then they're target capping or adjusting the target cap on multi-shot and Starfall Volley. So the fact that this is a directed nerf at Heartseeker Barrage, which I have a log pulled up here. So Heartseeker Barrage currently doing about 30, almost a third of Alarian's overall damage, and seeing a nerf of about 11% to your top damaging ability is pretty significant. I'm not sure exactly how that's going to kind of impact his overall balance. I think it probably shifts him maybe away from a Heartseeker Barrage build and maybe into something like a Volley / multi-shot build. But I don't really play Alarian, so I can't really comment on that too much. Mara, on the other hand, is getting a very slight nerf to her funnel damage in the form of a 15% nerf to Feed the Queen. This is, again, the talent that whenever you use Skittering Blades, it increases the damage of your Queen's Fang by a percentage. Before it was 9% up to 6 stacks. Now it's going to be, before it was a 10% buff for every stack, stacking up to 6 times, which meant it was going to be a 60% buff to Queen's Fang. Now it's going to be a 9% buff per stack, stacking up to 5 times, which equates to a 45% damage increase. So overall, a slight nerf to Mara's damage, but she's still in good shape. Tariq is getting a couple small adjustments. The first is they're increasing his AoE damage by buffing Hammerstorm baseline, increasing that by 7%. I think Tariq kind of fell out of favor just slightly, but this is just to kind of help him in his overall damage, because I think Hammerstorm is still his highest damaging ability throughout the dungeon, especially now when playing Schism. The Square Hammer talent is also getting buffed by 4% per stack. So this is just a minor adjustment to Square Hammer. I don't really think too many people are playing this talent, so I think this is trying to bring that talent up to a little bit more of a competitive space. And then there's just some UI components where Schism is now being tracked as an important hero buff on that important hero buff bar, so it's easier to track when Schism is active. Following Rhyme's Void Touch nerf, we're seeing a slight damage compensation still coming through. So we're seeing Ice Comet, which is her AoE spender, get a 5% damage increase, and then we're seeing Bursting Ice get another 5% damage increase. And then Coalescing Frost is getting a 10% stack, or a 10% increase, which I believe is her Freezing Torrent talent that causes it to pulse AoE damage. So really they're just trying to bump up Rhyme's AoE damage after her Void Touch kind of niche in popping a single target. That playstyle kind of got nerfed, so they're just kind of improving on her base damage. Moving into Mako, she got a slight damage increase on Stone Shield, which I don't know if that's for aggro purposes, but just seems relatively minor. Lashing Storm Kick is now dealing reduced damage beyond 8 targets, where it was 5. So this gives her a little bit more AoE damage, and this should also help increase her self-sustain, because I believe Lashing Storm Kick also heals for a portion of the damage dealt. And so if she's hitting more targets for full damage, This means that her self-healing goes up in large target counts. Artios got some very minor damage increases, as 7% damage increase to Searing Blaze, which is a pretty insignificant source of damage, I believe. And then Fireball got a almost 7% damage increase as well. But I think these should play a little bit into Detonate. So even though they're small individual buffs, they still affect Detonate in a pretty positive way. I don't know overall how this is going to bring Artios into line, but I'm sure that taking Detonate kind of damage accumulation into account, this equates to a much more significant buff than what it appears. Then Vigor is getting some damage increases. Soulbrand, it's being brought up by 6%. This is already his kind of main source of damage, I believe, so it's doing a little bit more damage now. And then we have Radiant Blast also doing a little bit more damage, and same thing with Dawnbreaker Orb. Next up, we have some armor set changes with the Heart of Tuzari 2 set. Dark Prophecy, it's no longer going to scale the proc per minute base cooldown with haste. So if I'm understanding this correctly, the Heart of Tuzari has a 0.8 procs per minute. So this could be brought up with higher haste levels, but now because it is it's no longer scaling with haste, I believe this means you're just going to have a static 0.8 procs per minute. So I think overall this hurts the overall uptime of this set bonus. So I think we're seeing a little bit of a nerf come through for this armor set. Next up, we have a few weapon trait buffs or reworks. And the first one is Sapphire Aura Stone, which has been redesigned. Currently, the Sapphire Aura Stone causes a stone to spawn next to your target, and then it'll kind of sit there for, what was it, like 15 seconds, 20 seconds? I don't remember. It'll sit there for 15 seconds, accumulate all the damage that you are dealing or healing over that time. And then after its duration is up, it'll start pulsing for damage or healing. The rework now is, well, because you had to wait 15 seconds before it really did anything, that usually meant that everything of importance was probably already killed at that point. So what they're doing now is, instead of having it just accumulate everything over 15 seconds and then just do a really big pop, now they're having everything accumulate over 3 seconds, and then it's going to pulse for 3 seconds and then accumulate for 3 more seconds, and just kind of repeat this over that 15-second duration. So because the damage is now going to be distributed over smaller pulses, this means that Sapphire Aura Stone, especially in DPS scenarios, you're going to get a lot more value out of it, because you're actually able to land some of that damage earlier in the fight when there's a lot more adds or mobs still active. So I think this will be a pretty solid update for Sapphire Aura Stone. However, because it is still a random proc, this is still going to mean that you're kind of reliant on RNG for stuff like this, but when it procs at the right moments, it's probably going to feel really nice. Diamond Strike is getting a little bit of an update where the procs are now going to be separate for both the healing and damage instances. So this is intended to help build the correct stacks. So like if you're trying to do damage, you don't want a healing proc to kind of steal your like RNG proc and buff up the wrong component of your kit. Emerald Judgment is just getting a bit of a damage increase, so nothing too exciting here. It's still a little bland, I feel like, and I'm not really sure if anyone is using Emerald Judgment at the moment. Similar to Diamond Strike, Kindling is getting separate procs per minute on its damage and healing procs. So again, just trying to keep the 2 separate healing and damage components of the weapon trait from kind of stealing procs from each other. Grounded Spirit is now going to give you a stack every 1 second that you're standing still instead of every 1.5. This will mean that you're, of course, gaining stacks much more frequently, but I'm still not sure how effective Grounded Spirit is going to be. Stalwart Readiness is now giving you a stack every 7 seconds while in combat, where it was every 10 seconds. Basically, 10 seconds without taking any damage was pretty long time to go without taking damage in certain fights, making Stalwart Readiness kind of useless. I think nerfing this, or rather buffing this down to only 7 seconds in combat makes it a little bit more manageable to use. And I think Stalwart Readiness is, kind of gaining a little bit more competitiveness with this update. And the final weapon trait update is that Patient Soul is getting a slight increase to the expertise gained from this weapon trait. So I think currently it is providing about just a pretty minuscule expertise rating, especially since you're required to stand still for 3 seconds, which can be detrimental, of course. So I think buffing up the amount of expertise that you're gaining from this effect is going to be appreciated. However, I still don't think it's going to be very competitive. Next up, moving into some of the curse updates. So really it's just one curse that's being updated, and that's Binding Ice. Currently, this is an effect that I feel like is underutilized. It's not really something people try to play around with, but basically Binding Ice is going to do put a ring around the players, and then it bursts for a little bit of damage on the player and it roots them, but it also does damage to mobs, and the damage that it would do to those mobs was pretty insignificant, all things considered. Really, I think Binding Ice kind of had a playstyle almost similar to that of Stone Skin, where you're kind of doing a lot of damage back to the mobs by utilizing this curse. But what is changing now is that the damage that players are taking from Binding Ice is being reduced by 50%, which makes it a lot less punishing. And now the enemies, they're taking basically full damage from Binding Ice. So, or actually, I'm not sure if that means that they're just taking full damage right now based off of the current value, or if it means that the current value is just being doubled. I'm not exactly sure what their intention is here. I am reading this as Binding Ice just doing full damage right now. But then most importantly, enemies will now be stunned for 2 seconds when they take damage from Binding Ice, which is insane. This is a very good change for Binding Ice. This is the type of curse that I think a lot of players want to play around. Things that are going to give us a lot more agency in how we are interacting with different mobs and stuff like that. So overall, I think this is an incredible change for Binding Ice, and I'm really happy to see updates like this come through. And then the final adjustment is something, there's a lot of words here, but to try to summarize, they're adjusting enemy health in every single dungeon and adventure. Basically, their intent here is they want to reduce the amount of time players are fighting against bosses and shift that time into fighting different mobs for longer periods of time. So I think a lot of us are probably familiar by now that when you're in a dungeon, it feels like if there's like a 12-minute timer, it feels like half of that timer is spent fighting a boss, just like 6 minutes of that time just all on a boss fight. And then the other like 6 minutes are all dealt with trash. And the balance of that is just a little off. So what they're trying to do is maybe reduce your time fighting a boss from 6 minutes down to like, I don't know, down to like 3 to 4 minutes. And then the rest of that time should be invested more into fighting different mobs. But the other important thing to note is the mobs that you're going to be fighting, the lower health, kind of less significant mobs, they're getting higher health increases, and the mobs that are more lethal, they're not really getting any adjustments at all. So the example that they're giving here is in Sith Rolls. If you're fighting an Ice Shard, those Ice Shards, the health is being increased by 11%, and then something like the Sentinel's health is only being increased by 1%. And then probably the most dangerous mob in the entire dungeon, which is the Arcane Scholar, their health is not being increased at all. So you can kind of see what their intent is with this example, where they're just trying to increase some of the kind of like the fodder mobs, the ones that don't really do much of anything. They're kind of turning them a little bit more into damage sponges, and kind of directing or kind of keeping the more dangerous mobs the same as they are today. So overall, I think this is a pretty good change. The other change that they're making specifically for dungeons where there's multiple bosses is they're increasing the amount of spirit you gain from killing a boss. So this should mean that you're gaining your ultimate a little bit more frequently throughout a dungeon, which again means that you can probably try to do larger pulls, which, as everyone probably knows by now, doing large pulls is kind of one of the most fun aspects of the game. So they're really kind of trying to push us into more of those spirit abilities coming online faster so that people can have more fun more often, which I think is a good change. But that's going to wrap up this patch note update coming again on November 27th. A lot of these changes are made in preparation for the December 11th patch that will be coming here soon, which again is supposed to be one of the largest patches that we've had since Fellowship's release. So I'm really excited to see what's coming in on that day. As always, if you found this video helpful, make sure you like the video and subscribe to the channel to stay notified when more Fellowship content comes in the near future. But this is GooberTroy, and as always, thanks for watching, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.